All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Fermat Fridays. Today, I have, I think, the first engineer who has ever come on the podcast. I've got Austin Gandy joining, and today, Austin, we're going to jam a little bit about future direction of Fermat, the Fermat product, and what we've been talking about is kind of speed, ease, how quickly can we get people building funnels, and like how much of that can we take on. So Austin's kind of the lead guy here at Fermat on these auto creation, smart recommendations, kind of everything designed to help with that speed and ease of use of getting Fermat funnels set up. So Austin, welcome to the show.
Cool. Yeah, super excited to be here. It's been fun to kind of be working on all of these kind of new capabilities that we've been kind of bringing to market over the past couple of months, and yeah, excited to chat through it.
So let's talk about some of these things that we're bringing to market, like how we're thinking about this. But before we get into kind of the details, I'd love to kind of like set the room a bit here. So at Fermat, we kind of live in the intersection of ad platforms, commerce platforms, and kind of like living in between those two things. And wanted to get your thoughts on kind of like how what you're working on is bridging those two worlds through Fermat. Because if we think about it from the user's perspective, like there's a lot of information, a lot of data in these ad platforms. There's a lot of information, a lot of data inside of Shopify. Like, how do you think about kind of like bringing those two worlds together to make Fermat more effective?
Yeah, totally. So it actually kind of has developed pretty naturally because a lot of the data that we pull in from ad platforms and from e-com platforms is really core to how we operate our business and how we make sure that we're able to make brands successful. So this is like telemetry that we get from Facebook on how certain ad campaigns are doing, and we can kind of associate that with shops that are in production. And then those shops are obviously populated by data that we're pulling from Shopify. And so kind of establishing those data connections didn't have much to do with kind of like smart recommendations or these like magic modules that we've been really excited about lately. The original intention was more just like, let's make sure that we are able to kind of like help brands be successful in optimizing their shops and make sure that those shops are kind of full of products that they're interested in merchandising. But what we've realized recently is there are so many different use cases for those data sets that we have access to when it comes to kind of like intelligently recommending different permutations of a shop or different manifestations of a shop or a funnel, and surfacing those to a user based on kind of the understanding that we have of the state of the world for them in their ad platform as well as in their e-com platform. And so this can take a number of different shapes that we can go into some detail about later, but kind of high level, our interest with smart shops, smart recommendations, all of that is looking at what data we have available to us and getting creative about different use cases for that data. So it could be things like getting a really granular understanding of purchase behaviors of consumers for a particular brand, so that we can always kind of most intelligently recommend the right upsell product, for example. Or it could be kind of more sophisticated levers like grabbing all videos that they have in flight on Facebook, transcribing those and getting an understanding of kind of like, okay, what's the brand voice here and what are kind of like the main selling points that get hit on across all of these different kind of signals that we have about how they talk about and merchandise their products, stuff like that.
You made so much gold in there. So like getting creative with, well, one, hey, looking at the connective tissue between these two, like wasn't even necessarily at the beginning about making these smart recommendations or automating anything, but this idea of like understanding what's happening through the full funnel. Because like up till Fermat, that wasn't exactly easy to do, right? Like you had all this data living in your ad platforms that would tell you how good you were at creating desire. And then you'd have like the conversion metrics pumping back in. But then in Shopify, you would see what the products are, how are those products related to one another. So it just seems like there's a lot of good information here to make someone a more informed marketer. But from what the way we're approaching it, like, hey, let's take some of this and let's start to like automate some of the jobs to be done by the growth marketer here, so that it's not just informing them, but actually making it so like they don't have to think about as many things. What I loved some of the examples you gave there, like, hey, from all the video content in the ad platforms, like which of these are great at generating clicks? Like how many people are we getting into funnels with this type of content? But that's only half the equation. Now from the Shopify side of things, like what products sell well together? Like what are frequently purchased together? Can we start to merchandise these shops in smart ways where, hey, now if I know that, I can actually bring those products into the creative as well and create this kind of like cohesive experience. But let's not make it like manual to put that cohesive experience together. Let's automate where we can and make it just so much easier for that growth marketer.
Exactly. Yeah, we're breaking down silos where we can, and yeah, to your point, like just forming those connections. There are a lot of these like kind of implicit connections between different data artifacts, right? Like you basically have kind of you have your content, you have your ads, and you have your products. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes those are really always associated with each other, but sometimes those associations are more implicit than they are explicit. And so anytime we can kind of like grab that signal and form those connections, we're in a really good spot to kind of provide leverage to users and really to allow them to spin up kind of the most performant funnels, even in sometimes potentially surprising ways that they might not have even kind of conceptualized themselves without those nudges that we're able to provide.
I had Shreyas on the pod a few weeks ago, and I think I'm trying to remember what the term was. Divine brilliance, I think was the term. Like, oh, sometimes you find something through divine brilliance, but sometimes it's just about, like you were talking about, like the connective tissue between these things, like content plus ad plus product. Pretty straightforward. Every marketer in the world knows that, like, that is the sum of the like that's the sum that's going to lead to a conversion and like purchases. But like that connective tissue between them all is the important piece. Like, hey, if this product was connected with this type of hook or this type of like ad angle, like you could have something that is more performant. And like for us, performant, it could be like better conversion. It could be lower CAC. It could like, there's a bunch of different things here. So it's like, let us kind of like feed all of these data points in and try to find like the best modular construction of these things to lead to the outcome that you're in search of.
Exactly. And I think there's an interesting question here of kind of how behind the scenes do we allow a user to go as well, and kind of what associations do we kind of present front and center versus simply kind of like allow to just work in the background, and kind of how can we do our best with the data that we have and the analysis that we're able to kind of layer on top of that to have a high probability of being right with whatever default that we kind of like originate, but then also making sure that we give users all of the levers that they would be looking for along the way to be able to tune those where like maybe what you're trying to upsell isn't actually what has been most frequently purchased historically.
Exactly.
It's kind of like a new upsell vector that we don't have that data on yet. And so kind of trying to find the right balance between smartly inferring what our best guess is at what a user is looking for, while also kind of equipping them along the way with all of the tools that they are looking for to be able to kind of override those where necessary.
That's a really good point. Like, hey, let's give you the tools to be in the best starting spot possible, but then allow the user to fine tune that as they see fit. That's like the upsell one. Like this happens all the time in D2Cs. Like, oh, we've introduced a new product and that's a strategic sell through right now. Like we want to be putting that in front of as many people as possible. Hey, not enough data or like correlation to say like, hey, let's throw that into all the shops. But like, I'm going to take 80% of what you recommended to me, Austin. I'm going to throw that one in because like I know my boss's boss wants that to sell through right now. There was a conversation happening a while ago where someone was trying to sell a new product line, and Facebook, like when they were trying to run it through their Facebook ads, Facebook would just like kick it out because they couldn't optimize it the same way for the old products. So like that sucks. So do I build like a new Facebook account to run those products? It's, hey, let's like put something here, but then let you take control so that you can get it to your strategic narratives, directives, whatever that is. So that's a good jumping off point into some of the things that we've actually been actively working on right now, and something that we've been referring to as magic modules. So Austin, I wanted to kind of like let you tease what are magic modules, what are we building, why are we so excited about that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, very, very stoked about this feature. Modules are kind of the building block of our shops, right? So you can a shop has a number of components, but let's focus in on the lander, which is where a user lands the first time they kind of enter into a shop. That lander consists of a number of different modules, and so a module might be a banner with some text, or it could be a video with a product highlighted on it. And we have a number of these kind of composable building blocks, which to date have been kind of manually populated with whatever data we kind of need from a user. So you could imagine yourself filling out the text of a banner by just kind of coming up with how you want to merchandise a shop. You could imagine yourself uploading a video and then specifying the products to highlight with that video for like a video and product module, stuff like that. The idea behind magic modules is how can we kind of take these connections that we're able to kind of glean from the data that we're pulling in from ad platforms and e-com platforms and use those to inform how modules get populated. And so a couple of examples of this, we have a product grid, which is a type of module which you can specify kind of which products get highlighted in that grid. And these will soon be kind of auto-populated by what the kind of most likely to perform well products are based on the contents of the rest of that lander. And so similar to that, we have a text module where you can specify kind of a title and then some markup. And very soon we'll be kind of using all of the data points that we have on a product to be able to kind of automatically generate text for that text module based on some kind of pretty straightforward and easy to input prompting that a user would be providing. And so really we're kind of going through kind of our corpus of modules and starting to ask ourselves, what are the data points that we have at our disposal, and how can we make these kind of easier to configure and just kind of magically working right out of the gate, while still kind of giving users those levers that I was talking about earlier to override when they feel like they know better than the system does.
That's amazing. And like you hit on a few examples there, like the product grid and the text module. And like the text modules are exciting to me because it's going to save our user time. Like, hey, let's put something there. You potentially using like the tone of voice, the product details, like let's pull everything we know and like give a starting point. What I'm the most excited about though is those product grids or any module where we're serving up a product, because like with text, it can be a little subjective. Like the marketer wants to, hey, like
Definitely.
I want to talk about it this way or that way. What products are bought together and like what products are probably the most effective for whatever it is. Like, hey, I want to increase AOV, I want to increase contribution margin, whatever. That's less subjective, especially if you're an established Shopify business. Like you have a lot of data on that. So like that for me is the really exciting thing, is like I don't need to go comb through pages and pages of Shopify data to try to like build these relationships, or like use a different tool and then feed it into here. Then it's, oh, I'm going to go build an experience for my ad, and it's going to bring in these products as a starting spot. So maybe without going into like the crazy secret sauce, like what do we look at when we're building those product grids to like try to build effective pairings, or like if we're going to put a product upsell together, like what do we like, what are a few things that will feed into that?
Yeah, sure. So our main interest right now is like we're going to be trying a lot when it comes to kind of what capabilities we are exposing to users, as well as kind of what algorithms behind the scenes are powering those capabilities. And I think our competence there is going to kind of ladder up over time, across the different types of magic modules that
Yep.
that you may encounter. And so for something like a product grid, we think of that as an upsell opportunity. And so the first pass at understanding how to populate that grid really comes from kind of scanning the existing incarnation of a shop and understanding which products are kind of being highlighted as what we call a hero product, and then looking at past Shopify purchase data to understand which products are most frequently purchased with that product. And so that's like a pretty kind of straightforward and easy to understand, easy to implement approach. But one thing I'm excited about along the way with this module, as well as others like the text module, is we're building them in such a way that we will have telemetry on how all of this stuff actually performs in the wild. And so, though right now we're kind of just using a pretty vanilla approach to populating that grid, you could see down the line, once we have kind of more granular performance data that's specifically shop based, we could start feeding that performance data as well into this process to better inform kind of what should be included in those grids. Another example of kind of some signal that we get is we will be auto-populating these grids, and then sometimes users are going to change them. Mm-hmm. And so making sure we know kind of which changes are taking place and what has kind of commonly been configured is another opportunity for kind of future growth, where like ultimately the UX stays the same, but our level of sophistication and how frequently we are correct will improve over time. And so, yeah, very interesting data problems there, I would say. And ultimately, kind of performance is our North Star. And so we want to make sure that that is kind of informing what kind of decision-making process is taking place with population of that grid. But yeah, that's kind of how we think about like one. I mean, yeah, it's funny because it's a very simple manifestation in actually like the UX of it, but behind the scenes there can be kind of so much that's going on to power that very simple here are your products experience.
It's funny because like as a product marketer, if someone's like, well, how do you market AI? It's like, it's tough, right? Because like it's just like, here's an output, and like what the magic is like everything that happened behind the scenes. Like, oh, how's that different than this one that I built? Well, it's the fact that you didn't need to put the time into it, the energy into it, and like, hey, it came up with something like that's usable in the same, or maybe even better than something that you had before. And I think like you hit on something really important there, which is that like, yeah, we're learning about like what we see about like your shop information, but like, hey, what did you add? What did you take away? And like we work with a bunch of brands. Like, is there similarities between what brands are like adding and taking away? Like, are people tend to put in like lower value potential upsells in here? Are they putting in like bundles? Or like what is happening here? And we learn that across, because like one really interesting thing about Fermat is because like we're kind of like, I've been struggling on what the word for it is, but like kind of like a closed system where it's like it's coming from the ad into the Fermat funnel, then back to Shopify. Like it's a very direct through line of data. So it's like nice and clean, that I think that gives us a lot better data set to look at than I think like trying to scrape and cobble together things from the main site, which could have a bunch of different traffic sources, a bunch of different things kind of interfering.
Totally. Yeah, we have kind of less noise that gets introduced along the way. And I liked what you hit on there with kind of, yeah, AI being a little frothy right now. And one thing that's kind of been our North Star with putting all of these together is that we really want to be solution agnostic and orient towards what's going to make users' lives easiest and what's going to result in kind of the highest performance shops. And so if that involves kind of like us doing a bunch of linear algebra on a bunch of GPUs, then like we can kind of explore that. But also if it involves kind of a single SQL query that is kind of getting us to the outcome that we're looking for, we're probably more happy with that because it means we're going to be able to ship something faster. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's been an interesting process to kind of ask ourselves more of how can shops become more performant and our users can kind of have more time rather than how can we bring AI into the product. And that's been a very helpful and clarifying orientation along the way, I would say, because there's a lot of stuff that you could do just for the sake of being able to say like, oh, hey, we're talking about AI just like everyone else. And instead of that, we're much more interested in kind of like how do we provide value to our users.
So you're saying I shouldn't do a product marketing launch where I just plaster AI and ML onto absolutely everything we're talking about and see how much buzz we can generate?
Yeah, there you go. Fermat GPT, you know?
Yeah. I do like what you said though about like, hey, what we're ultimately trying to do is give that growth marketer more time back and like lead to more performance. And I think a lot of what we were talking about in here is like, let's, whether it's auto creation, smart recommendations, whatever it is, like putting our bet, like the best version of this in front of someone and then giving them the power to adjust from there. Like that helps with both giving them more time, but also being performative because like we can look at what performative means, but like what performative means to that brand, that marketer in that moment can be different every single time. So like I might be going after like how do I build funnels that are as profitable as possible? I might be looking at like, hey, how can I get funnels together that move product that I'm sitting on? Like there's so many manifestations of what an effective funnel is that like you were saying, like we're always going to be learning, growing, and like finding new ways to integrate this. But one of the best ways to do this is to give the best jumping off point and then let people mess with that to tailor it to their specific need.
Indeed. Yeah. Yeah. You've really hit it on the head there. And that brings up interesting questions as well of kind of like, are there different approaches to how these modules get populated based on those performance goals that may vary from brand to brand? So down the line, you could see a situation where that's something that we actually collect information from a brand on upfront during onboarding, and that actually informs kind of which processes we go through in order to kind of populate modules in such a way that that we're optimizing for those performance goals.
Even allowing like the optimization on a funnel level, right? It's like, hey, this funnel is like a hard acquisition funnel, like optimized just for revenue. Like I just want like a lot of people buying this versus like, oh, this is a funnel I'm putting together for like like I'm more targeting existing users. Let's go for profitability here and like having that level of control over like what I'm actually targeting, both at the brand, like, hey, generally speaking, I'm interested in this, but like for this specific funnel, I want to do this. And like a lot of what we do, like you and I talk about this too, is like experimentation velocity, right? Like, hey, I have ideas. I want to try something. Let's get it out there. So like allowing people to have those hypotheses and like target something to that.
Certainly, yeah. And then the ultimate grail there, right, where we would love to get to is so right now how that experimentation loop works is we provide tools to allow users to launch experiments, which they can then kind of understand the result of and then kind of nominate a winner accordingly. I'd love to get to the point down the line where, in fact, the system is kind of self optimizing in and of itself. where it can kind of come up with experiments on its own, and we are feeding the kind of results along the way of those experiments back to the kind of system that is kind of determining the configurations, the set of modules for a particular shop, and then optimizing those in the direction of the performance goals of a user. And so it's exciting that we are taking steps in that direction, and also exciting just kind of how much headroom we have from here. There's just, the sky is really the limit in kind of what we could be able to do here.
I don't know why I thought of this, but also like the dial on like how aggressive I want to be with like my experimentation that I'm doing. Cause like our CEO has this line that he drops on the marketers all the time where it's like, you're better off being really wrong than kind of right. So it's like, oh, I want to try some like really crazy stuff against each other and be like really wrong on like a small subset. But again, like that's one of the great things about Fermat is you're kind of like building in like an isolated funnel where you're trying these things to a subset of traffic from an ad account. Like you're not making big sweeping changes on the site that like that big swing, that big bet that could potentially be like a 10x improvement, but could also be like a huge flop, doesn't really make it anywhere other than like where you controlled it to be seen.
Certainly. Yeah. And ultimately, right, like if your experimentation velocity is low, it doesn't even really matter if you're hitting more than someone whose experimentation velocity is super high, because in aggregate, high experimentation velocity is what's going to allow you to be right more. Yes. And is also going to allow you to kind of like find where you're able to kind of take those big swings and kind of if you're able to on a daily basis permute what the kind of presentation of a shop is that you're putting in front of a user, you're going to run circles around someone who has to wait a week for every single change that they want to make and test.
Run circles around them, but also de-risk it, right? Like the analogy I like to use is like darts at the dartboard. If you're only going to throw one, you better take your time and hit the bullseye. But if you took your time to throw one dart and got 1 point, people are going to be upset. So why not just like throw as many darts as you can and like see what works and continue from there to de-risk that. So like find winners, but like also don't put all your eggs in one basket. Like we see that way too often in D2C marketing. It's like, I spent 2 months trying to put together the ultimate landing page or the ultimate PDP. And like, if it turns out, great, but what if it doesn't? Then like, you're kind of stuck and you lost 2 months.
Exactly. Yep. 100%.
All right, Austin, this has been amazing. Thank you for giving us a peek behind the curtain on some of the things we're working on, what's important to us right now. If anyone wants to follow along with you, you got like Twitter, LinkedIn, newsletters, carrier pigeons. Where can people keep tabs on you?
You know, that's a great question. I do have a Twitter where I don't post too much, so I'm not going to plug that for now. I would say just find me on LinkedIn if you would like. Full name once again is Austin Gandy, and I don't know, just use the search box. I don't have my LinkedIn URL memorized.
I'll get Austin's LinkedIn into the show notes so that if anyone has questions about what we're up to,
there we go.
Wants to jam on some of the stuff that we nerd out about, like, is what we like to talk about. So I'll make sure it gets into the show notes. Austin, thanks for joining us. Thanks for being the first engineer to come on the show. I'm sure first of many.
Yeah, happy to represent engineering here. It was fun. Thanks, Alex.